Hey Mike, I'm really sorry that this video is reaching you late. I'm really sorry about that. So next time I think I'm going to give the technical answers as quickly as possible, which should suit your need without some fancy animations, some fancy logo design to illustrate the point, complex animation, things like that, which is actually not necessary. Okay, so let's get to the point without further ado. Regarding your question about the Skidmarks looping animation, I have already created here a simple crude graphics using shape layers, After Effects shape layers. This, okay. Oh yes, of course, I've already replicated the method you're using to animate the graphic, which is using a track mat, okay, and then keyframing the position property of the graphic itself. So as you can see here, the graphic is moving from right to left, okay, from right to left. So inside this Skid graphic we have vector layers, shape layers actually, After Effects shape layers, okay, as you can see here. I've duplicated numerous times, but the difference is that I have made some colored marks here so that you can easily see which is the end and which is the beginning of the graphics. So here the red one is the beginning of the skid marks, and this is the end of the skid marks. Okay, so we will know exactly when will this graphic loop, because this is essentially a random pattern, right? So we cannot know exactly when will it loop if we don't make these marks. Okay, so there are actually numerous methods to achieve such seamless looping animation. Numerous methods, numerous practical techniques in After Effects. But all methods, all techniques should adhere to the 3 principles that I've already written on the Process Street checklist. Those long paragraphs, if you have already read them. The first principle says that for a seamless looping, the first and last frames should have identical imageries between them. So they should be similar or nearly similar. So here on frame 0, which is essentially the first frame, we have this imagery, we have this state of the animation. Okay, the red bar is here. As you can see, this, okay. Now, the last frame here on frame 60, it's on frame 60, has the imagery like this. Of course, these are not identical. The first and last frames, they're not identical, as you can see. So according to the first rule, we have to make the first and last frames identical. How do we do that? Well, it is the task of the animator to create such an identical first and last frames. Whatever methods you're achieving, whatever methods you're working on, the main goal is to make the first and last frames identical, whatever methods, okay? But in this case, because we have the graphics moving from, as you can see, from right to left, okay, which is essentially a single graphic moving from right to left, and this is the last frame, so we have to finish this graphic first. We have to finish this first graphic first, moving from right to left, because this is the last frame, and this is the first frame. As you can see, this is the first frame and this is the last frame. There is no way we can make it identical if we are just using this single graphic, right? So first we have to move this off screen first, this one here. We need to move it off screen using the position property. We just need to slide it off until it disappears. Okay. Now we have a blank slate here. This is how we are going to make the last frame identical to the first frame. Okay, So to do that, this is the first method. Okay, to do that we have to duplicate the vector graphic itself here, duplicate it, and then position it on the end, right at the end, right where the blank slate should be. Okay, here, just an example. So essentially what we are making here is creating an inherent static graphic which is already looping. So the graphic itself is already looping in itself, right? Even with the animation, the graphic itself is already looping. So this is the first segment of the graphic, and this is the second segment of the graphic. So let's get to the main composition. Here, as you can see, this is the first frame and this is the last frame. Nearly identical. This is the last frame, because as you can see here, this is right where the loop starts here, right? So this is the last frame, is nearly identical to the first frame already. So let's see if it is indeed identical or not. So we go to the first frame, okay, to frame 0, take a snapshot using this button here, okay, and then let's go to the last frame. Let's get to the last frame here and use the button here, show snapshot button. See, it's not identical. It's nearly identical, but it's not identical. Okay, so this is the first frame, this is the last frame. First frame, last frame. Okay, so how to make this perfectly or exactly identical? Now that we have already taken the snapshot, what we need to do is just to simply nudge this using the position property, or using the keyboard arrow keys. Simply nudge it. As you can see, the first frame there is more to the left, which means that the last frame should be moved more to the left too. Let's see. Now it's more to the right. Okay, this is the first frame, more to the right than the last frame. So I have to move the last frame to the right like this. Oh, now it's already perfectly identical. Like, let's take a look here. Yeah, there's some I think it's already identical. When it comes to, when it is played back, it's not that noticeable. Let's see if we can make it even more identical. It's more to the right, more to the right, and there's some blurring over there due to the movement. Oh yes, I've already enabled motion blur here, which makes it so we have to disable motion blur at first. So let's see. Oh yes, that's true. The first frame is more to the right, so we have to move it to the right a little bit. Let's see. Now it's more to the left. The first frame is more to the left very slightly, which means that we have to reduce the x-axis here. Probably 145, exactly 145. Let's see. Now I think it's already perfect. There. It's already good. Okay, now we have successfully created similarities between the first and last frames. So this is the last frame, as you can see, and this is the first frame. That is the first principle. Okay, the first principle, creating the first and last frames as identical frames. Now let's get to the second principle. The second principle says that we have to cut back one frame from the last frame. So as you can see here, if we loop this here, if we loop it, there's a pause. Oh, so we are using an easy keyframe here, so we have to make it linear. Okay, but that's not the problem. The problem here is the last frame, okay, here you can see, and the first frame, they are identical. So when the playhead here reaches the last frame and then goes back to the first frame, there will be a slight pause. A very slight pause, actually. Look at this. The animation and pause. And then pause. Pause again, like that. Okay, so to avoid that, because essentially the first and last frames are identical, so we have to go back one frame here. From frame 60, we go back one frame using page up button. We go to frame 59. Here is exactly where we want our animation to end. Press the end button there, okay? And then when we loop it, as you can see, there is no pause, okay? Maybe on your end there, when you're viewing this animation, there is some glitches when the animation is played back. Well, that is not because of the error of this method, but because of the playback in the video player, either in YouTube or in my recording software. But to see it more clearly, you can see from here, composition settings, frame rate, probably set it higher to something like 60 frames per second. And I don't know, yeah. On my end here, on my screen, it's very smooth. There's no glitches, no pauses. But possibly in YouTube, it's another story. But this is a very, very smooth looping animation, okay? There's no glitches, no pause, no jarring or snapping movement. And this loops indefinitely. So there you go, okay? This is the first method. Essentially, to sum it up, the first method essentially is about creating an inherent looping static graphic in itself. So the graphic, although it is static, is already looping in itself, as you can see here. See, the graphic is already looping, even though it is not animated. The graphic is already repeating itself. So that's one way to do it. Okay, this is the first method. The pros of this method is, of course, it is easily understandable. Yeah, I think that's obvious. It's easily understandable. And, well, it doesn't require much After Effects experience, because you don't have to tamper with expressions and maths, etc. Okay, so let's get to the second method now.